Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Search with Candor, the podcast where I interview the best and brightest minds across SEO and digital marketing. I am your host, as always, Jack Chambers Ward, and I'm joined this week by Alex Dees from Meridian. We're going to be talking all about AI search, how to optimize your brand, your clients, your sites for getting referred to by things like ChatGPT search, AI mode, Perplexity, all the LLM and AI powered search engines we've seen grow over the last few months, it feels like, but we're certainly in the thick of it at the moment. If you haven't already, please do like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. If you want to get every episode straight delivered to your inbox, please hit the notification bell or follow us on things like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your podcast platform of choice. Leave us some comments, let us know what you think of the show, the kind of guests and topics you'd like to see, or any feedback you would like to hear from us. Basically, we want to hear from you. It really helps us improve the show and grow throughout the year as well. Without any further ado, here is my conversation with Alex Dees, and we're talking all about AI search. Enjoy. My guest this week is co-founder and CEO at Meridian and a former head of business development at Zeal. Welcome to Search with Candor, Alex Dees.
Thank you, Jack. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited.
Thanks so much for joining me, man. It's a pleasure to sit down. So just before we start recording, I've seen your videos around on social media. I've seen you pop up a couple of times, and Meridian's an interesting tool for AI visibility tracking and stuff like that. And that is going to kind of be the topic of this week's episode. We're going to talk a lot about ways to optimize for AI search, things you should be paying attention to, viewers and listeners, about how your brands, your businesses, your clients are being seen in AI search. And I guess I want to kind of kick things off and open the floor to you, Alex, of why you think now is the right time. What was your thought process behind launching Meridian and how you kind of got into that process in terms of a business strategy and where you think the industry is going as well?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, how I kind of ended up here, I had worked in startups, especially like fintech startups, in San Francisco for a few years. And I kind of saw this like AI was compressing the buyer journey. I think across the way I thought about it in my head was, or the mental model I came to was people are finding, evaluating, choosing, and I think soon buying more and more products through AI. It's not totally like a reality today, but I think it's kind of like where we're seeing some of the world headed. And, you know, really like every kind of marketer, business owner that I talked to was feeling very confused about the first three. You know, how do they measure themselves? How do they get both found and recommended in this new search platform? Ended up really going down that rabbit hole for many months, and then kind of ended up founding a company around it that is now known as Meridian.
Nice. Yeah, I think it's a big conversation that's happening obviously around the world around LLMs and generative AI and all that kind of thing. But obviously in our little bubble here in SEO and search marketing, I think a lot of it is, like you said, down to that customer journey side of things. A lot of us are talking about what's going to happen when fewer people are visiting our websites, right? I just mentioned to you before we started recording and something I've talked about at Brighton SEO before as well. I think a drop in visits to sites can be a serious issue for a lot of particular businesses. Publishing comes to mind straight away for obvious reasons, news sites and things like that. But I think we are in this pivotal point, this turning point in many ways, especially with all the announcements coming from Google and Microsoft and OpenAI and these companies that are powering these platforms. Do you think this is kind of a big change in the industry that is here to stay for a long period of time? Do you think this is going to be the future of search? I have perhaps controversially predicted that like things like AI mode will take over Google as the main function. How are you feeling about where search is now and where it will be in a couple of years, do you think?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. One, I think honestly, it makes SEO more important than ever. As that funnel collapses, it is very important that AI, you know, knows about your brand and likes your brand. I think you mentioned like, you know, a drop in like visits to your website. And I think, yes, there's a drop in human visits. There's a significant increase in AI visits or bot visits, right? And I do think having that mentality of my website isn't really purely just for humans anymore. I am actually marketing to AI. I am marketing to superintelligence. And how do I make sure that I convey information that is both helpful for humans and AI, I think is significantly more and more important. on your kind of point around, I do think AI mode is going to be the default. I think Google has not officially confirmed this, but I think they are clearly hinting to it. And every week they seem to be adding, some little AI overview feature or some expansion that hints to AI mode being the default in search. So I do think for the professionals working in this industry, my prediction is that it's not going away either.
Yeah, I think that is definitely something. I know there seems to be kind of two sides to it, right? Where the like you said, the AI overviews and AI mode being the elements of Google, but literally the way people use things like ChatGPT and are using LLMs like Gemini, like Copilot, like Claude, all the other ones, there is a real element of the way people are interacting and looking to buy things or read things or whatever, how they're using the web in general is changing. And I think for a lot of us in SEO, obviously there's big conversations about, keywords don't exist anymore, search is dead, blah. We've heard SEO dies every 6 months in this industry, let's be honest. Like, that's not really a conversation I think is, actually relevant. For you, what are the main kind of differences between traditional SEO as we've known it for the last 20 or so years and the more whatever acronym you want to choose? I don't know if you're an AEO or a GEO or an AIO kind of guy, whatever you like.
I like AEO because I think you're trying to like optimize for being in the answer, but I do think it's just like an addition to existing SEO. In terms of like the difference between SEO and AEO, I really do think they're augmented parts of each other. When I think about AI search, the whole thing is, you can get into like the little nuances, but at a high level, it's just you want to be the answer, right? For those queries that you really care about. And I think there's a few things that kind of matter there. One is, of course, being included in the answer that is given by that AI search platform. Ideally, two, you are cited or like you are the source of that truth. And then three, ideally, how you're recommended. Right, you can be included, but not be the number one recommendation. I think those are the three like main KPIs that I think about for getting in. But really, it's are you the answer to the queries? And there's obviously a lot of things that kind of feed into how do you become the answer. But I think that is really the goal for humans. It is a significantly better. Why I don't think AI search is going anywhere is it's a significantly easier process for us to ask a question to get an answer versus ask a question, get a bunch of blue links, spend 20 minutes, reading a bunch of stuff and then finding that. And it is a little bit high level, but like it's true. My dad, 74 years old, sends me his Perplexity deep researches. And when I see that, I'm like, all right, this thing is probably here to stay. It's here to stay.
I like using the are my parents using it metric. I always do that as well. My parents are decidedly untechnologically what's the phrase? I'm trying to be very polite here. My parents don't really use the internet very much in general. They're in their 70s as well,
Good for
and
them.
it's a real kind of thing of like, my mum will make a big. She will text me and be like, "I just ordered something on Amazon." I'm like, "It's 2026, mum. Like, cool. Yeah, I've been doing that for like 15 years at this point." But
Right.
yeah, I think you're totally right. It's that kind of bleed through and escape from our little echo chamber in the industry. Because again, I feel like people like you and I in this industry, in tech in general, we're all talking about AI all the time. We're talking about search and how things affect our lives and the way people search and things like that. But the general populace are probably not thinking about that. They're busy, doing their day jobs, feeding their kids, doing all the other stuff that people do and don't think about SEO 24/7 like many of us do. And I think you're totally right as well. The augmentation, I think, is a really nice way of putting it, where SEO, and we'll go with AEO. That's one of the ones I prefer as well. So I'm glad you landed on that. Um, there's an element there of like a lot of the best practices still fit the model, still fit the process, still fit the strategies. For you, when it comes to like the optimization process, if you're creating content, talking to clients, working with people who are using Meridian and things like that, how does the optimization process differ for you for AEO versus SEO?
Yeah, I think the main thing is really it's not about keywords. It's about answering user questions, right? What are the questions that your customers have that you want to be the answer for? I think there's a lot of little like I don't want to say black hat, but there's a lot of like little strategies that I think like people in this industry really focus in on when there's very often a lot of low hanging fruit to just like answer user questions that are actually helpful for both a human, and if you can do that, hopefully helpful for AI to take your answers and give it back to a potential customer as well. And so when we work with a customer, it really is starting with what are the questions that we need to answer for your users. What are those questions that we want to be you the answer for and for you to be known for, and then taking it one step at a time from there.
Yeah, I think that's why AEO kind of works as you mentioned, right? That kind of works
Talking about it.
as the best abbreviation.
Yeah.
Targeting the answer side of things. And I think you're totally right as well. There's been discussion, the developers here at Canada built a tool called Also Ask that takes a lot of the people Also Ask data from Google, those specific questions. And for years and years, we've been talking about speak to your customers, get your customer data, speak to your sales team. They probably have information that is relevant to the pain points of your customers and all that kind of thing. For me, I think it's an interesting discussion to get into. You mentioned earlier, like how to measure that, how to actually demonstrate success from all that stuff. Because I think we've seen a lot of data where huge numbers are thrown around, right? Like 80% of searches are done here and all this kind of stuff. And there's all kinds of different, numbers being thrown around. Some people say it's 5% or 10% or 20% or 50%, whatever it is. I guess the point is like it's there whether you like it or not, right? I feel you're right that it is here to stay and it is going to be a future of search whether we want it to be or not. And a lot of it, as you just mentioned, offers a pretty like lower friction experience than traditional search in many ways, especially as we'll get onto later with the agentic side of things, which is about the lowest friction you can possibly get for a customer journey. For measuring that side of things, what kind of approach do you take to reporting to clients, speaking to Meridian customers and things like that? How do you actually measure the success when you're not talking about, necessarily clicks, impressions, rankings, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think a lot of what we try and do at Meridian is we do try and be very data oriented, like how we are like proving ROI. And there's a few things that you can like measure very concretely, right? One is referrals. Now you can have a whole conversation around how many referrals are actually being tracked and what is that percentage. But ideally, you want to make sure that the trend is going up, as well as how many bots are visiting your site. Now, one thing that we have, I think, like in Meridian, right, is something called like a visibility score, which is of the queries that you want to appear for, how much are you appearing over time? I think there is kind of this something we get asked a ton by customers is like, what is my visibility score in my industry? They want like some coherent like ranking of like, okay, here are my 10 competitors and here is like the number that I am specifically at. And we do not sell that. Like we do not say that this is like your visibility score in the industry because that data is nobody has that data really in any way that like really makes sense. But we do try and take that visibility score in terms of like this is your progress over time, right? For the queries after onboarding that we decide that we want to like optimize around and get you more visibilities for, it's a good way to track those queries. And then I do think there is under that like overall visibility score, a few things that we try and track in terms of like one, share of voice, right? You can be appearing in a query that consistently gets 20 other brands appearing as well. We want to make sure that your share of voice or the share of how you're looking in that query is as high as possible, as well as your position or what we call like prominence. You can have 100% visibility in certain queries, but if you're consistently getting ranked 10th, there's still very much room for improvement. And so I think you can break down this visibility score into a number of different things. But overall, it's really, for the questions that you want to be the answer for, how consistently are you appearing the answer? How much do models actually trust you, your content, and your presence across the web? I think that is something different about marketing to AI versus marketing to humans. Humans are a little bit more emotional. I think things about marketing to humans don't really work as much to marketing to AI. And so you do have to have this like consistent presence across the web in trusted places, in communities, in forums, in editorials in order to win that ranking. And honestly, I do think it's kind of a return to it's much harder to fool AIs. You still can do it, but I think it's much harder to fool than to humans. And so it's kind of this, you have to do marketing in the real way to show up consistently for AI.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting way to describe it, being less emotional, right? Because marketing 101, I think for so many of us is like especially advertising in general, like you get an emotion out of your potential customer, out of the viewer, out of the reader whether it's positive, negative, shock value, whatever it is, you get that
Mhm.
initial reaction, right? And that can often be the hook and the difference between, bringing in new customers, getting clicks, whatever it is. I think you're touching on a really interesting point there of how AI and LLMs see your brand differently. And as something, again, we've touched on the show a couple of times before, the trust element of it, right? And I've seen plenty of examples of people being able to manipulate it. Obviously, people spamming things like Reddit and forums and other sort of like trusted sources that then
Yeah.
the AIs then reference. I don't know if you saw, there was a study that somebody from Ahrefs did a couple of months ago, towards the end of last year, that was, they made up a completely fake brand and like did a fake AMA and all this kind of stuff, and was just like, yeah, it's totally real, and made some like, it was like a paperweight that cost like $8,000 or something. It was just like absolutely
Yeah.
astronomical numbers that were like, this doesn't make any sense. But they were able to like kind of manipulate their way and wrangle around a couple of things where certain LLMs would then start referring to them and start
Mhm.
referencing their brand and things like that. How do you go about that approach? Kind of like, I guess, filtering out the noise in a lot of ways, right? For me, I think that's where the variation in query, the conversational nature of search we mentioned earlier, the query fan out nature that Google has talked about so often now, where even putting in one search or one query or one chat causes Google to kind of actually do multiple things in the background,
Yeah.
right? How do you go about filtering out that kind of the rubbish, the noise, all that kind of stuff as well?
In terms of when we recommend like strategies to our customers, mainly,
Yeah, yeah.
I think one like test I have is just is the strategy you're doing also helpful to a human? If you were
Mm.
doing something specifically only to market to I generally think it's probably a short term strategy and it's not going to work in 6 months and a year. And you can do it, and there's a lot of strategies that like very much do work right now. But I think these models, especially like the model providers, like a big question for them is going to be, how do I get accurate data in the next 6 months and maybe in the next year, as so many more marketers are kind of paying attention to this search. And I think that they're going to slowly cut the things that were being done solely to market to AI. And so if you are doing a lot of strategies solely to market to I would say that they're probably not long-term strategies. You can do them, but they're probably not, what's going to be working like a year or two. And so we do try and push towards, do things that are helpful to both your customers. And generally, if they are helpful to your customers, they will be very helpful to AI as well.
Yeah, that leads on to a topic I added into the show notes. There's a big chat about chunking, right? The
Yeah.
the whole thing about how to format your content for LLMs, and so many people saying this is the definitive answer to exactly how you should be doing your content. Other people saying this is just bullet points and paragraphs. I've been doing this for 50 years. And then Google also saying stop chunking your content, just write good content, which is what Google has said forever, right? Just write good content has been their byline for a while now,
Yeah.
but it's not actually helpful advice, really. At the end of the day, like, just make good stuff is like, yeah, sure, that's not how the world works. That's not how the economy works, right? What do you think is their kind of the approach to chunking? I think, to lead on from your conversation there, like, is it just a thing people are doing for LLMs? Do you think it is relevant for humans, or is there somewhere in the middle where you can kind of do it in a proper way?
Yeah, I think there's somewhere in the middle. You definitely want to like build strategies that are, of course, helpful for marketing towards AI. But in terms of like chunking, the way I think about it is like you should be structuring your content anyway. If you aren't structuring your content, it's probably pretty hard for people to read. Also, and
It's just a
they're
wall of
probably going to get
text.
yeah. And so like structure it in a way that like makes sense. Putting the things. There's like all these little strategies that have been shown to work in like AI search, which is like putting key takeaways at the top or like an author bio, and those are great, and you should do those because those are helpful for a human anyway. It does signal authority. It does help them like get more out of the content. I do think it is very much writing good content in a way that is structured for humans. And if you do that really well, it's going to work pretty well for AI as well.
Yeah, I think that is, like you said, people kind of get stuck into those strategies that are maybe short term focused, like, oh yeah, this will work short term, and that has been true. Again, you hinted at kind of the
Yeah.
more of the black hat tactics as well. Like, that has been true in this industry for as long as it has existed, right? People have been doing short term make money while you can, cash out kind of strategies for years and years and years, and they will continue to do so. For the vast majority of us, because I feel like the vast majority of the industry is still white hat in many ways, we're in this kind of process of, having these difficult conversations with clients. I don't know if you've had similar experiences, and you hinted at in the origin of Meridian there as well, like people coming up to you and saying like, hey, I've heard about this thing, we need to worry about this thing. My developers, my IT department were talking about AI the other day. How does it work? How do we, us as an agency, we've had this conversation with clients as well. How do you kind of go about having that, I guess, not necessarily like negative conversations, but just trying to sort of temper expectations with people as well, so they don't just suddenly start chunking their entire website?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it is just an honest conversation around like, ideally you're investing in something. If you're going to be putting money into something, especially if you're like a customer here, you ideally want to be putting money into something that'll be helpful for years to come and not 3 months. And I think a lot of it is taking kind of like the analogies of what's worked in search for the last like 10, 15 years versus what's worked now, right? A lot of those like short-term strategies that was purely gamed at the algorithm, a lot of them end up getting cut. They get found and they don't work long term. At the end of the day, I do think it is you want to do the things that are actually helpful for humans, and we've seen this kind of over and over again. And even if you aren't rewarded by the algorithm, you definitely will be rewarded by the algorithm in the future. These algos are always changing, and they are very much incentivized to reward good content that is helpful for a human. And so I think it is kind of just like that short term versus like long term thinking around where you do put money and resources in appearing more for AI search.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of what, again, I don't want to use like extreme terms like fear mongering or like overhyping or anything like that, but I definitely think a lot of people hear the word AI and kind of it all goes gloom and doom, apocalypse, Terminator
Yeah.
style, like everybody starts freaking out, it's the end of the world. But, and like I said, everybody says SEO dies every 6 months at this point and have done for years. For me, I think it's an interesting point to pull on that thread there when it comes to, should you be changing your existing content, right? If something is performing well in traditional search, you've got a handful of informational blog posts or product pages or whatever. How are you having those kind of conversations with people, using tools and features and things like that, where you're analyzing if this does work for AEO versus SEO and things like that?
I think there are some customers that ask these kind of questions that are like very specific to those, but I honestly think the vast majority of customers have like a lot more low hanging fruit to tackle than this like question around how do I optimize like one specific page across these two. I think there's kind of, especially when there's any kind of like new technology change, there is oftentimes, in a company there's an AI task force and they have this like budget to go spend money on tools, and they're like, okay, we need to go spend a bunch of money here. And very often there is a lot more things that would be much ROI that you can do for free or very low. And so I would like shift a little bit, which I think when that does happen, I very often find that like when we're getting to that point in the conversation, there's such small ROI and like these little like optimizations versus going and focusing on like a much bigger thing, which is like investing in having a community or investing in the actual like editorials that matter versus the kind of these like little nitpicks that I think like sometimes we can get in this industry obsessed with for like a couple of weeks, and then it's like the next thing.
Yeah, definitely. I think that ties around to what you said earlier about brand visibility as a whole, right? That has definitely been the buzzword for like all of last year in SEO was brand, brand, brand. Everything's brand. And I think you're totally right about zooming out to see the bigger picture is kind of key in many ways, especially because how people are searching, how people are interacting with ChatGPT search and Gemini and all these kind of other platforms.
Hmm.
It feels much broader, but then also searches can be super, super duper specific in many ways. But that doesn't necessarily mean you need to be incredibly specific in your products. And
No.
I think you're totally right that a lot of what we've been doing in SEO already kind of ticks a lot of those boxes. You mentioned author bios, you mentioned, key takeaways at the top, contents tables, all that kind of stuff. Like yeah, that just makes things easier to read for humans. It's not
Yeah.
necessarily going to be, you know, perfectly optimized for bots in the same way.
And
But
I do love one of the things that you mentioned earlier, which is like go talk to your salespeople, right?
yeah,
I
yeah.
think a lot of people like spending a lot of money on like very expensive data on like what are people asking, and I found that the best way is just go ask your salespeople what are the questions. Like have them record 10 calls. The questions that your customers are asking are probably the ones that you're doing a pretty bad job of answering online as a brand, right? You see a lot of these studies around how, especially in like B2B buying, like some 90% of B2B purchases are now made at some point with a consultation from AI, which kind of means like AI is now your new salespeople. If your salespeople are asking questions, it likely means that you have not built good enough content, or you're not directly answering those questions. And so, um, just to hammer back that point, I think that is a very often overlooked strategy, which is like talk to your customers, see what questions they have, go and answer those questions, and you'll probably do a pretty good job in AI search.
Yeah, there's I can't remember the name of it. Google recently announced an AI powered, essentially like business agent kind of thing,
Of course.
where you can essentially create, for want of a better phrase, your own chatbot. So when people inquire about your company or your brand, or you appear for an inquiry or a query, you can have the users ask that chatbot question. So, like, this is the Candor bot, and it will answer questions about the agency and our services. This is the Meridian bot, and it will answer, like, hey, what tools would be best if I want to do A or if I want to do B?
Mhm.
I think you're totally right that actually having conversations with the sales team is hugely relevant and is often, I don't know if you, I'm sure you've experienced this, Alex. Like, you get that thing where you're searching on a company's website, you want some like customer service, or you're looking for a really specific thing, you can't find it, and then it keeps sending you in a loop of like, call us. And then when you're on the phone, the waiting thing goes, have you tried checking our website? I'm like, yes, that's why I'm calling you. My first instinct isn't to call you. I'm 35, I don't want to call you. I want to see things on your website. Like, you just get in that endless loop of customer service over and over again.
Yeah.
That drives me mad. for that side of things, how are you, I guess, approaching that data, right? When it comes to search data, when it comes to that sales data and customer pain points and things like that, what is that kind of process to, again, I guess, optimize it for AI search, for search in general? Are you prioritizing the sales call stuff? Are you prioritizing the kind of search data stuff, combinations of both, or is that kind of a case by case basis, I guess?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both. You know, we primarily build software. We do work with some customers on more of like an agency model, but we primarily build software. And so a lot of what our onboarding looks like is both taking the data that we have on, Google Search Console, like the actual specific data, but a lot of it is asking for like you should be uploading transcripts. You should be having the customer when they start in the software, writing down just like the manual basics of like what are the questions that we get asked, and that is a lot of times an even better like priority lead list of like the types of like queries that we should be like optimizing around versus what they do have in like specific data. And I think it is kind of like an art as well as a science, but when we think about like getting someone started on Meridian, we try and like mix those both in order to kind of like cover essentially the basics. And then that becomes kind of like the starting point for like this AI visibility journey and like the questions that they need to like do a better job answering online.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's it really has to be kind of like you said, a combined approach, right? Data is cool and sales calls are cool. For me, I think where a lot of people get lost, and I've had many conversations with clients about this over the years, is not combining that data. Or like you said, having transcripts can be so powerful. The actual recordings of those calls and then transcribing them can be the difference between like an anecdotal, like, yeah, I think a customer I spoke to last week kind of said this thing of like, no, what did they actually say?
Yeah.
And how does that compare to the way people are searching? And for me, I've seen definitely some movement and some trends in, obviously, the way we are searching is different. It's more conversational, and actually it more closely aligns with how people would ask questions in a phone call than it would have done, 5 years ago or 2 years ago even. I think for me, when it comes to like that kind of tokenization and clustering and combining of all those queries, how do you kind of then approach that for something like e-commerce side of things, right? Are you thinking about the kind of answers to put on product pages, or are you creating, informational content and blog posts and things like that? We're going to get into the e-commerce side of things. We're going to get into
Yeah.
agents, but let's start there.
Yeah, I do think like the way I think about it is, everything that you do maybe for like a software company or an agency company that kind of sells like one product, you have to do at an individual level for kind of like a product or a product category for an e-commerce company. And that is a little bit more it's a little bit more complicated to do, but that is kind of where we think about it, right? When you look at like how all of these products are getting integrated into AI, right? The entire buyer journey is suppressing from the top. What do I buy my mom for Christmas? To specific questions down under price, condition Y, condition Z. You need to be answering all of those questions for each one of those products. The very simplest one is, have a set of like 10 FAQs that are like most answered for these products. Build your question answer set and put that on each specific product, because that is really how people are starting to find all of your products through this like question answer format. And so the more structured way you can deliver that data to the human, the better, right? Something I think about a lot is websites were not designed as clean data mechanisms
Mm.
to take your product data and give it to AI. They were initially designed for a human. But the truth is like that's kind of what they're becoming more and more. And so the better ways that you can figure out how to structure that data and give it to AI, the more success you're going to have, especially as an e-commerce merchant, because the entire buyer journey is collapsing. And that's not just the find, search, evaluate. More and more, the last step, buy, is going to happen. And that's, e-commerce are the first ones where their website are going to be totally removed from the buyer journey. You are, maybe fortunately or unfortunately, still going to be buying software from a person for a few years to come. You're not going to be checking out for your enterprise Salesforce subscription in ChatGPT probably anytime soon, but you will be buying shoes end to end in ChatGPT and AI mode. And so, I think for any industry that is like the most important right now to like be really focusing on that structured data on a product level, it's e-commerce. Exactly like you were saying.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting era of agentic search. And I know it's something Sundar Pichai from Google has talked about, where he's kind of seeing the future as the agentic web, is how he described it, where we're essentially, even how, Google is kind of has been the front page access to the internet, as much as Reddit calls itself the front page of the web. It's not really. It's more Google. Sorry, Reddit. But
Yeah.
it's the way to access all of that information, right? And we're almost taking another step further back as users, as humans, and letting agents do the browsing for us, right? And I think you're absolutely spot on with providing proper product data and providing. I had Alex Wright on the show a couple of months ago talking about how he was kind of discussing how shopping feeds and like product feeds and stuff like that, the way you were handling your metadata in your backend and providing that feed to things like Google Shopping for ads is actually also relevant for organic and is becoming more and more relevant as you can, give feeds and provide that data to agents as well.
Mm-hmm.
How are you feeling about the kind of agentic commerce side of things? And as you said, they're providing clean data. What does that look like for you in terms of recommendations and what you're thinking about for your clients and customers?
Yeah, I think there's a few things there. I think we are seeing kind of I think of all the industries that are getting impacted by AI search, I think you are seeing e-commerce kind of the most, right? Pretty soon you'll be able to buy anything that you probably could buy online through these chatbots. But the first one, as we're seeing going live pretty much right now, is these e-commerce. And so they really do, I think it is kind of this shift of thinking about just how do I optimize around maybe those like bottom of funnel queries to all the way across the funnel, from like the initial discovery to the middle of funnel, like choosing, kind of like a product or category to, X versus Y. And then taking those kind of like queries or, the questions that users would be asking. And then how do I map that on to each one of these products for me? How do I win the the top of funnel, the middle of funnel, and then the bottom of funnel, and what do I have to do for each step, right? Winning that top of funnel is a different type of process versus at the point of somebody knows that they want to buy these running shoes. What are the things I have to do? I have to prove myself. I have to be in communities. I have to get reviews. I have to show that like this is actually a good product versus maybe other product. So I think it is kind of, it is oftentimes a manual process, but like think about the funnel for each kind of query. What are the questions the user asks or like want to do? And then how do I answer that either on my own content or on the other places on the internet that matter for getting picked by AI?
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned there we're seeing the very early beginnings here. Google launching the Universal Commerce Protocol, right? The UCP, and it relating to huge companies around the world. They're really kind of pushing to make this a bit more easy for brands and commerce sites to be able to access this kind of thing without having to handle all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
How are you feeling about UCP? And do you think that is going to be the driving factor for a lot of people to adopt agentic elements into their e-commerce strategies?
I think so, yes. Although I do think this term like agentic commerce gets a little bit thrown around in terms of like what part of the process is the agentic part. Is it like more of the discovery and like choosing process, or is it the actual like checkout process? Either way, I think it is very important for all like e-commerce merchants to be thinking about how do my products actually show up in these AI searches when this funnel does collapse, right? And like mapping out the strategies there. We'll see where my thought on Google is that pretty soon AI mode is going to be the default. They're going to want to like own that shopping experience pretty much end to end within that like default, and that is a good way for like e-commerce merchants to think about like this is my new website, right? The entire buyer journey happens in this like AI mode, which means this is kind of an extension of my website now that they aren't actually like coming to me. But yeah, I think you're absolutely kind of like spot on, which is this clearly does seem to be the future of buying. And so let me make sure that I'm ahead of the pack and my competitors versus behind.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. Using the broader phrase of agentic commerce there is interesting, but actually getting into whether it's the discovery part of the process or the checkout part of the process. Obviously, the checkout part of it is so much easier for people to get their head around, to implement and stuff. We've seen embedded and integrated checkout processes, and again, removing that friction for the customer journey, right, in so many ways. I think that's the bit that doesn't kind of freak people out as much, if that makes sense. I think leaving the discovery to agents is where there's more room for weird stuff to happen and things like that. And you mentioned earlier, right, if you're going to add a query, you need to be specific about price ranges, materials, all this kind of stuff, the things that you want to actually get from that. And I joked a couple of months ago on the podcast that was like, oh, what happens if a agent goes rogue and buys a thing and you run out of money in your bank account because it bought a $5,000 thing instead of a $500 thing, and whoops, you typoed a zero. Are you liable for that money? How does that work? All this
Yeah.
kind of stuff. And we've even seen eBay kind of come out and say, do not use AI agents. We will only use the ones that are authorized through our systems. Do you think we'll also see a bit of backlash there as well?
I think I might be a little bit against here. I do think when I think about agentic commerce, I think about like the first few parts of the funnel. I really don't think for consumers that having an agent go and buy the thing versus like me press the button solves that much of a problem. And I think it's actually I don't think you're going to see widespread adoption in a few years for like, oh, I need the agent to actually like go and like purchase the end part of this purchase. I just don't think it solves like nearly as big a problem for the consumer versus like figuring out what is the best thing to purchase or what they need to buy and like comparing all those reviews. I think for agentic commerce, the use cases that interest me a lot more are honestly like the B2B use cases when you have these like
Mm.
businesses that need to be buying hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of SKUs, optimizing, the time that they order them, the price that they order them, all the like discounts across the web. I think those type of like agentic commerce purchases just solve a significantly larger problem. And so there's an incentive to actually like build those solutions. I I don't know. Maybe I'm too old also, but I don't think that having an agent end up buying the like one thing or one thing I buy a week online versus me press the checkout button really solves like that much of a problem. And so I don't think it's going to see like large adoption for the few years. I think if you're an e-commerce merchant, the agentic commerce, like quote unquote, parts that you should be really thinking about are the first few parts of the funnel, which is getting found, evaluated, chosen.
Yeah, I think you're right there. That's the bit that, for one of our phrase, involves the most work from the user, right?
Right.
And that's going to be removing the most work from us. Like, really, you could talk to one of your smart speaker things. I won't say the names because I know they activate, and you might be listening to this out loud in your kitchen or something. And you say, "Hey, smart speaker, buy me a thing," and think that that particular branded one can do that, very easily. That we've been able to do that for a while. You don't even need to touch a button. Or they literally, I'll use the exact example. Amazon literally had those buttons where it's like, oh, you need to order more toilet paper. We will literally give you a button where you can go, bang, I need to order more toilet paper.
Yeah.
Don't need to go on a website. Don't need to use your phone. Don't need to use a laptop or anything. It is a button like you can attach to a key ring and just be like, tomorrow I'll have new toilet paper.
I think
That for me is how like agentic checkout feels. I think you're right. The agentic product stuff, especially the B2B
mhm.
and the scaled stuff, is where it gets juicy and interesting.
I think it just solves a real problem in the B2B. I don't think it really solves that much in B2C. I don't know. Maybe if you're ordering 50 things online every day, then like it could solve a problem for you. Or if you're like super rich, I don't think the vast majority of people are doing that, and I don't think they have really that much of a problem. Like, I don't really think they're like, "Oh, I really hated, like, press that checkout button and, like, confirm with me." And so I think when I think about agentic checkout in terms of the actual, like, buying, I do think it's, you have this big warehouse, you need to order 10,000 things every day. There's a bunch of, like, manual processes to go in, you need to compare quotes, you need to, like, do all this, like, order stuff. Those I think are, like, very interesting use cases, but I personally don't think I'm gonna have an agent buy, like, my spoons or something, for a few years at least.
There was an example. It was an incredibly British example. I apologize in advance, Alex, but it was the supermarket. One of the biggest supermarkets here in the UK is Tesco, and they one of the first demonstrations, I think it was of the OpenAI agent, if I remember correctly, was like make a Sunday roast dinner. So like
Mhm.
roast potatoes, vegetables, meat, gravy, all this kind of stuff. It's a very multi-ingredient meal that would require you to go to a bunch of different aisles in the supermarket and be like, okay, I need this one from there and that in aisle 6 and that in aisle 10 and all this kind of stuff. They did it with an agent of like, I have £30. I need to feed me and my partner on Sunday. Make me a roast dinner and purchase it from this supermarket. And it mostly got it right. And I think it is elements like that where, sure, you're saving a bit of time, but like I'm in that example, I used their example of like it saves you from visiting the aisles and stuff. I'm like, right, but
Yeah,
if I'm on your website, I'm not going down aisles. I can just type in gravy, potatoes, chicken, turkey, whatever. Like that's not you're not saving me that much time at the end of the day. I'm not. It's not the difference between agentic search and being in the aisle at a supermarket. It's being on your website and agentic search, right? And I think
yeah.
people try feels like it tries to exaggerate the benefits, like you said there, of like the checkout. Like, yeah, I can buy my own stuff. I'm fine. But actually, comparisons, price ranges, all this kind of stuff, that is where it can get overwhelming. And like you said, especially when you're doing it at scale, especially when it's big numbers, that can get pretty interesting. And I think that's where a lot of businesses will kind of come to see the benefit of it more.
Totally.
Do you think it's more big businesses? I think a lot of people have been talking about how, again, brand being the key word there, like the big brands are kind of winning AI search in many ways. Do you see that similarly for the e-commerce side of things? Obviously, Google have already mentioned they're partnering with, marketplaces like Etsy and supermarkets like Walmart and things like that. These huge household names. Is there still hope for small businesses for agentic searching for shopping and AI search in general, do you think?
Yeah, I do think in these like very competitive markets, you are seeing a little bit more of like a the rich get richer type of thing. AI likes to answer in lists, usually lists of 5 to 10, and those big brands generally get chosen for it. But I do think there is, in these like very competitive markets, you're seeing that happen. But one thing I am seeing a lot more is like you in these more like niche markets, I do think like the vast majority of businesses operate in, non let's sell running shoes to a global market type of markets. And that is they're either local based, they're service based, or they have kind of like, one main thing that they do differently. And I do actually think that like those companies aren't as affected. You're seeing them be able to like get their word out, spread kind of, honestly drive a lot more leads from like the AI systems in the matter of weeks versus the old school like SEO would have taken like 6 months, 12 months. And so I think when you look at like the vast majority of businesses out there in the world, and like take a step back a little bit, I think a huge amount of them are actually like having a lot of success investing in um, just AI search and like the strategies around, how do we like produce content? It's kind of a lot of the same things that we went over like 20 minutes ago. But I do think that like, yes, I am seeing that where if you are operating, if you are trying to sell like a CRM in a market with like 1,000 people and, you were kind of like 400th, it's pretty hard to get to like within those top like 5, 10 slots that AI is going to recommend because there is just so much content, so many millions, billions of dollars that you are competing with for brand on the internet.
100%. Yeah, I think that's the market is growing and is also shrinking in many ways as well. Like you said, it depends on your industry, depends on what you're competing with and who you're competing with.
Mhm.
And I guess to kind of wrap up this little section before we get into the recommendations, what are the kind of things, kind of trends you've seen, maybe some of the data from Meridian that you're seeing that have surprised you over the last few months? Is there anything that's kind of jumped out to you that has been like, oh, I wasn't expecting that kind of trend or that kind of movement? You mentioned B2B versus B2C. I think that's a really interesting conversation there. But yeah, has anything kind of jumped out to you in terms of the data you're seeing from your back end and your things like that?
Yeah, I think where a lot more companies should be investing in search really should be video in the next. And we're kind of like
Mhm.
chatting about this before the show, right? Is I think
Yeah, yeah.
YouTube will soon be clear in a way the number one social forum that is trusted uh, versus Reddit. I think Reddit
It-
and the cores are still going to be good because there's still just like a massive banks of like question and answer, which is essentially what AI search is. But I think especially as one Google moves more and more towards AI search, they're going to heavily rely on these sources that they trust, e.g., YouTube. And I think YouTube is like a very still trusted place in this ecosystem to get real user generated content. And that's what these AI sources are looking for. It is, it's not impossible to create AI videos, but it is a little bit harder still than it is to create like AI blog posts. And so I do think they're going to continue to like weight that a little bit more heavily. And I think you're kind of seeing this in real time, YouTube surpassing Reddit as those most important, essentially like UGC communities online. And so, one kind of like recommendation or something that we're tracking is like pushing our customers, especially to start investing more and more into
Mm.
informational answer user questions, but in the form of video that they can repurpose across all platforms, but especially towards YouTube.
Yeah, I did an episode with Georgie Camp from Veed a couple of weeks ago on
Oh,
this exact topic,
cool. Cool.
talking all about how important video can be. And I believe, if I remember correctly, Georgie used the term like, stop just making videos for the sake of it and create like searchable answers.
Right.
And I think that is very much aligned with what you're saying there. And I
Answer
think
questions. Answer questions in the videos. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. There's a real element of, if I remember correctly, YouTube is the single most cited domain in AI mode and AI overviews. And like you said, surely behind that is things like Reddit, Quora, Wikipedia, other things there as well. And I think, yeah, you're totally right. I think video is becoming more and more important. The format of your content, as much as we joked about chunking earlier, like video content is consumed both long form, hello, welcome to this podcast, and short form on social media, on other platforms as well. And I think, yeah, you kind of need to get with the times, right? And start doing video content.
That's what we're trying to do here, right?
Exactly, exactly. Let's wrap up with some recommendations then, Alex. Give me something you can recommend that is actionable that the viewers and listeners can start doing right now.
Yeah, I think it kind of depends on like where you are in like your AI search journey. We work with a lot of customers who are like very new, and they just want to like start getting the grasp. And what I would say is you don't need to start by investing in like fancy tools. You can start just take your most important questions, the questions that you want to be known for in chat, and start just running through maybe like top 3 AI tools every day and write down, what are the answers? Who is getting recommended? But really, most importantly, what are the citations? What is the data on the internet that AI is using to recommend these questions, right? To recommend solutions, products, services to the queries that you want to be in. And that's a pretty good starter step for where you should be investing in trying to get on the internet.
Nice, nice. Now, recommend me a tool or piece of software that you think people are not using enough of or deserves a bit more attention.
Yeah, we kind of touched on this. This is gonna be like a super, super basic, but I think Google Search Console is I always go back to it.
Hey,
It is
absolutely.
free. It has a massive bank of questions that your users are probably asking. Before you need to go spend a ton of money on any kind of tool, I think Google Search Console is more and more overlooked. And I think honestly, a lot of the hard part using Google Search Console for the last like 10 years was it's not like a great design piece of software and it makes things like pretty hard to like get around. But the cool thing is like you can ask AI right now. You can work hand in hand with ChatGPT, Gemini on how you should be using and getting the most out of Google Search Console in your SEO or AEO strategy. You don't need to be a 20-year expert anymore to be able to get like a lot of those like low hanging fruits. So I will always recommend just like start with the free ones, start with Google Search Console. If you want, you can actually use Big Webmaster as well. I think there's a bunch of funny like a bunch of memes and like the SEO community of like SEOs looking straight towards ChatGPT, where Bing is still a larger percent of their traffic. It is a great index for questions that you're using or that your customers are answered that is different from Bing, as well as like index citation, and a ton of AI search either directly or indirectly still relies on Bing. So I am going to recommend those two pretty basic ones.
Nice. Yeah, they're two sides of the same coin in many ways. I think you're right that Search Console has evolved so much over the last couple of months. It feels like
Yeah,
they've literally integrating the Gemini Insights kind of thing, so you can just say
that's
what was my
helpful.
best performing page over the last 6 months, or what has seen the largest growth, or what content is decaying. All this kind of stuff that is making it so much more accessible. Like you said, you don't have to be in the industry for decades to now dig around in the data and find stuff. And Bing Webmaster Tools, I always like to give a little shout out to Bing Webmaster Tools. It is like, I'm going to say a hot take. It's low key better than Search Console. It has like auditing and all kinds of bits and pieces and like cool other things. It gives you crawl data. It's like
Yeah.
I kind of respect Bing that they do a lot of like experimental stuff and all that kind of thing. But they also seem to just like, yeah, just do whatever you like. Like have the index now being a cool little thing of like you can essentially ping Bing to tell, hey, come and crawl my content, come and check out this thing I've just done. And yeah, respect to Bing for doing cool little weird things that allow us.
Huge respect to whoever the PM is right now, still working on Bing and making a great experience. I got to meet him.
Exactly. And last but certainly not least, something you've been enjoying recently. Bit of fun, whether it's a movie, a book, a podcast. What have you been enjoying recently, Alex Dees?
Yeah, any sci-fi nerds out there who grew up with the like Ender's
Hell
Game
yeah.
type of books, I am currently on my third reread of Red Rising. If you
Oh,
have not
dude,
read it,
yes.
it is my. Have you read it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Big Pierce Brown fan. Yeah.
Yeah, we've got the final book coming out pretty soon, and so doing like a little inaugural reread. But for any of those that kind of like those like sci-fi, intergalactic warfare thrillers, I would highly recommend getting started on the Red Rising series before the final book comes out.
Yeah, Red Rising was, I think it was one of the first audiobooks I bought when I signed up for Audible like 10 years ago,
Oh
probably
yeah,
something like that.
yeah.
And I remember like just getting stuck into that series and I read, are you a big Dune guy as well at all?
Not as much, honestly. I kind of ruin it for myself, which is like I usually try and read the books before I watch the movies, but I watch the movies first, and then once I
Yeah,
already like
yeah.
know what happens, I can't get through the books. So like
Hey,
that's
there's
a
like
thought
3 or 4
against
more
me.
books after that. But yeah, I read, quite a lot of Dune growing up, and I'm a big sci-fi nerd. If anyone has ever heard the
Yeah.
podcast before, you probably know that already. And, yeah, it has a real, like you said, that kind of Ender's Game, Dune kind of vibe. Like, Darrow is such an interesting character, and the way the like all the characters having cool little different nicknames and stuff like that, and like it feels very
Yeah.
I don't know, weirdly relatable for like a big spanning epic sci-fi kind of thing in many ways.
It's an incredible book. I do think it's kind of like the TikTokification also of, like, old school sci-fi, which is, like, every 20 pages, there's some new war or some new crazy thing that happens, but I absolutely love it. I cannot put it down, and I'm interested to see where it goes. They're, hopefully building out, like, a TV series pretty soon. It'll be interested 2 years ago, I was thinking about, like, how are they gonna show these, like, 8.5 feet tall guys? It might be the first big, use of AI in, like, one of these, like, old sci-fi movies or sci-fi books. So I don't know. I'm excited to see where it goes. I want to see it on the big screen, but first, got to get through all the books. So if you haven't read it,
Nice.
highly recommend.
Absolutely. And any podcasts you've been enjoying recently?
Yeah.
Apart
I
from
mean,
Search with Candor, of course.
apart with Search with Canada, of course. Search with Canada is 1, 2, and 3, but I think
Thanks,
down
dude.
the list, I think I am a huge, huge fan of a number of podcasts. I think Acquired is like has become my
Mm,
staple pretty recently. They give really these like very in depth overviews of businesses, and some of them are a little bit more tech businesses, but you also have things like they did an episode recently on like Coca Cola. Uh, which was very, very interesting. So for anyone who likes a little bit more of that like long form telling of stories, this story just happens to be about business. I would highly recommend Acquired.
awesome. Yeah, I will put links for everything in the show notes if you do want to go and check out Red Rising, you go and check out Acquired. And how can people follow you, Alex? How can people check out what you're up to, what you are doing at Meridian, and where you're posting on social media?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm on LinkedIn, Alex Dees, co-founder at Meridian, as well as like Twitter. I think pretty straightforward on those. And then, if anyone is interested in starting kind of like an AI search and like exploring tools around there, always happy to chat. You can reach out to me directly at alex@trimeridian.com or through like the company page at trimeridian.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me, man. It's been a pleasure to chat AI search, agents, e-commerce, and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, really, really great to sit down and have a conversation.
This was super fun. Thanks for having me on, Jack.
And that wraps up this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Alex as much as I did. I'm going to have some fantastic guests coming up over the next few weeks. I'm going to have members of the Candor team joining me on the show on a more regular basis. We're going to really get into some specialist subjects, get into some technical SEO, get into some keyword research, get into client communication and account management, all the fun stuff you experience at agencies. If you're looking forward to that, if you run an agency or a member of an agency, or even if you're doing stuff solo, freelance, or in house, these topics are going to be really, really relevant for you. And we're going to be doing things like the live podcast coming up just before Brighton SEO in April. We've got Search and Orange Excel coming up in September, and plenty of events before then. If you are going to be, I think our next one is going to be the Search London 15th birthday anniversary, whatever you want to call it, 15th birthday or anniversary event, which is teamed up with Search and Stuff in London on the 24th of February. So come and see a few of us who are going to be attending that. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. I've never been to a Search London. I've been meaning to go for so long. And I know Joe, Juliana Turnbull on the team do some amazing work. And of course, we love the team behind Search and Stuff. Yama, Begum, Bengu, all those guys that are doing fantastic work with that community as well. So, like I said, we'll be all over the place. There'll be lots more episodes, lots more videos, content, events, conferences, all that fun stuff coming up over the next few months. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next week.